we're running just a few minutes early, but whilst we have everybody here, we'll commence because it allows us then to get some extra time to be able to ask some questions. Maybe if I could start then just by welcoming yourself, David and Rebecca. You're welcome to our committee today, and we appreciate your attendance here to discuss what is for us a very critical matter. The impact of Brexit is going to be most harshly felt here in the north of Ireland, and I guess that is probably one of the reasons why the majority of us here didn't support Brexit and don't want to see it being implemented. The majority here are uneasy with Brexit, and especially the significant impact that it is going to have on trade and on opportunities, and indeed on communities right across the north. Last week we met with Vice President Šefčovič and heard from him and the EU's willingness to work flexibly with the UK to progress and to move forward with the process, especially around the protocol. And I trust that today we will likewise hear some discussions about the opportunities and the progress that we can make in that matter. I think the norm, we'll pass over to yourselves to make some opening remarks, and then we can open up then into some question and answer and have some discussion after that. And I'll pass over to yourself.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chair. It's a delight to be here. I'm very pleased to be here, and looking forward to a good discussion and some good questions. And as you mentioned, I have my colleague from Cabinet Office with me, Rebecca Ellis, who's responsible for this at official level. If I could just say a few things to start, and I promise not to take too long, because I think the questions are the important part of this. But if I could just say a few things to situate where we are at the moment on the protocol and where we're going. I think first thing is just to recall that the protocol was a huge compromise by us to protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It's a compromise that we made willingly as part of the Brexit negotiations, but it is pretty exceptional, and I think sometimes that's forgotten, that we agreed to apply EU law and we agreed to control the movement of goods within the United Kingdom. And if that highly unusual situation is going to work, it's got to work in a pragmatic and proportionate way. It can't be treated as just any other external border of the single market. I think sitting here today, the other thing to note is that, precisely because it was so unusual, that when I and Prime Minister negotiated this, we thought that it was essential to have a democratic component in the way that it worked. It is only a component, but there's an important role for this Assembly, clearly, in the consent vote, and that democratic ability to determine whether the arrangements in the protocol are fundamentally acceptable or not is an important part of the total construct and the way that it works. And I think that needs to be said, and it's why we've thought it right to involve the executive as fully as we can in the withdrawal agreement structures and so on. So it is a delicate balance, the protocol. It is a compromise. It's there to support the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That's not just the North-South aspect of it, and the very important, indeed essential, element of keeping an open border on the island of Ireland. It's also about East-West and the integrity of the institutions here. And the protocol does recognise all those dimensions in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And if it's going to work, it's got to work in a way that supports all those things. It's got to respect things that are in the protocol, the fact that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom, and bear as lightly as possible on the everyday lives of people in Northern Ireland. The fundamental place of Northern Ireland in the internal market of the UK. All those are important parts of the protocol, just as other parts are. And keeping that balance is extremely important. Third point, we have been implementing the protocol, and we reject suggestions that we have simply sort of ignored it or not tried. We've delivered 4 new IT systems from scratch. We'll be spending up to the best part of £500 million over the next year or two in schemes to support it, holding new facilitations to make it work. We provide access to some of our databases to the European Union to make it work. And indeed, the problems that are arising are problems of implementation, not of non-implementation. And I think that is important to recognise. But with all that, we have problems. And I think the fundamental diagnosis we would make is that the zero-risk approach to how the rules should operate is, in practice, privileging one part of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the protocol over the others. And that's what underlies what we perceive to be a perception that there's been a shift in Northern Ireland's place in the Union, underlying the trade patterns changes and some of the societal and political disruption we've seen in different ways in recent months. So those are the issues. We're seeing those sort of trade changes, and the impact is being felt. It is being felt in different ways. That's clear, but it does. We are picking that up quite clearly in people's daily lives. So there is a problem, and I haven't personally yet, though I might today speak to people who have said there is no problem with the way the protocol is being implemented. There's a range of views, but nobody thinks that I've spoken to from a wide range of political and civil society business opinion. Nobody thinks it's working perfectly as it should. All have suggested improvements. And it's in that context that we have put forward improvements. We've put forward a dozen papers with detailed proposals, and I can go into the details of those in questioning if it's useful to. It's welcome that the EU on the 30th suggested some further flexibilities and solutions, though we haven't yet had anything in writing on most of those, which is part of the difficulty. But obviously we would like to discuss, and we're open to discussing all those things. But it is true all the same that the current process isn't dealing with the fundamental problems, and there are underlying difficulties, and that's why we say we need to find a new balance in the way the protocol is working if we are going to manage it. There always will need to be a tailored treaty relationship between us and the EU covering Northern Ireland, that's clear. We need to find arrangements that are sensible, proportionate, have consensus so they can work. And fundamentally, we need to find a way to deliver that. We need to find a way to ensure that goods flow as freely as possible between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, where they're destined for Northern Ireland consumers, and that goods moving on into Ireland are treated in an appropriate way so as to protect the single market. So to summarise and wrap up, the situation as it is in our view not consistent with the careful balance that's in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Is not the way the protocol should be being implemented, and that is a political reality that needs to be acknowledged, and we can't ignore it. We will always prefer a consensual approach to solving this question, and I think there are ways of finding a way through and delivering that. That's the responsible thing to do in the interests of everybody in Northern Ireland, and that's how we hope to proceed, but obviously all options remain on the table. So as I said yesterday, we're considering next steps. We will set out our approach to Parliament in a considered way during this month. And final thing to say, with my sort of wider responsibilities looking at UK-EU relationships more broadly, is that I think the prize on offer for us, if we can find this new balance, is that we will set the relationship between us and the EU onto a different trajectory. It is a little bit tense at the moment. Nobody wants that, and I think the protocol issues are at the core of that. If we can move on, if we can find a way that works, we can get UK-EU relations onto the friendly, collaborative, cooperative, mutually beneficial trajectory that is what we wanted to see and where we would like to go. So there's a big prize if we can get this right, but it does need both sides to take the situation seriously and fix the problems that currently exist.
Okay, thank you very much for those opening remarks. It's appreciated to give us the context for our conversation and our discussion. We'll move on to questions, and I know that almost all members have indicated that they would like to speak, so we will try and work through questions as quickly as we can. I'll begin and maybe in some ways in summarising some of the remarks that you've made. That you're saying that the deal isn't being implemented as you thought. You highlight that there are problems and issues, and you do say that there are ramifications and impacts as a result of that. But can I ask, it's your deal. If your deal is so shoddy, why did you negotiate it?
So I think it's the underlying problem is that the way it's being implemented at the moment doesn't reflect the balance that we believe we agreed and did agree, and the way it's being being implemented doesn't reflect that balance. We need to find a way of managing principally the good movements of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland in a way that's consistent with the overall aims of the protocol, which, as I say, would support the Belfast Good Friday Agreement to minimise disruption to everyday lives and so on. And if those movements of goods and aspects associated with them are taking place in a way that undermines the protocol, then it is undermining its purpose. It's not working. So we have to try and implement it in a way that reflects the balance that's there in the protocol. For example, Article 5 says the Union Customs Code applies. Article 6.2 says we'll make efforts to ensure that to minimise checks at the ports of Northern Ireland. And those two things have to be read together. If you just read the first, then you're not respecting the balance. And finding the right balance is a political question, and we don't think we found the right balance yet.
And was there, as part of the negotiations, not the sort of the forward-looking or vision to say that they could be taken out of context, or that there would be a way to resolve that or discuss that? I mean, it seems to be that there are substantial problems from something that was negotiated and that there was an agreement on. It just seems that there are massive amounts of problems afterwards, which seems quite inconsistent with working to come up with an agreement.
So I don't think it's right to look at the protocol as a sort of definitive text that was there in October 2019. There's nothing more to say. I mean, it's very clear from reading the text that that's not the case. For example, the whole concept of goods at risk, which is obviously at the core of some of the problems in movements between GB and Northern Ireland, that whole concept remains to be worked out, and indeed it was very controversial in the talks during 2020 that Michael Gove led. So that is an explicit, that's one very clear area where you come to in that negotiation massively affects the way the protocol is meant to work. We also, of course, at that point didn't know whether there was going to be a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU or not, and that is the fact that there is a huge and positive change to that context. But it's not, I think, reasonable to say, given that the situation has changed in various ways and given that part of the protocol remains to be worked out, that it is a definitive text, and as of October 2019, that's it and there's nothing more to say. It isn't that sort of document.
In terms then maybe of the SPS checks, currently 85% of them could be removed if there is some form of agreement between the UK and the EU. But is it a case that the British government is feeling that free trade agreements with third-party countries are more important than dealing with the SPS checks that there is between East and West in terms of the UK?
So I think they're of similar levels of importance, to be honest, and they all flow from the fundamental fact that Brexit was about re-establishing control of, as far as possible, over our own laws and our own rules, and that applies to SPS and agri-food rules just as it applies to everything else. I think the problem we've got is that, at the moment the EU only seems to envisage one solution to this problem. And their solution to all these problems is, why don't you just adopt our rules and then there won't be a problem? And I don't think that's a sort of reasonable approach to take. We are accused of being ideological on this question, but it seems to me equally ideological to say the only solution is you adopt our laws, and that is a fairly ideological position to take, I think. There are other solutions, and we have proposed an agreement based on equivalence. We have sent in a document to that effect, and we'd like to discuss it. We were clear in the negotiations last year. We wanted an equivalence mechanism with the EU, but it was refused. I think this is one of these areas where we've got to find a tailored solution that is capable of reducing the level of processors, and intellectually that's perfectly possible. It's getting the politics in the right place that seems to be more difficult.
I know that last week when Vice President Šefčovič was with us, he had suggested that there could be an acceptance of the sort of agreement and equivalence until such times as there was divergence. So, I mean, certainly there seems to be a sense that there is a middle ground that could be moved to help us in the short term. Is that something that you feel is viable or an option?
I mean, I can certainly see, kind of room for discussion between the positions. We haven't quite got into a discussion on this. We are not going to agree to dynamic alignment. That is 100% clear. But there is, there's room for discussion, and we think the mechanism we've put forward that recognises the high standards on both sides and ensures that if there are changes, that can be reflected in the the level of processes that apply is reasonable, and we would like to talk about that, but it's not happened yet.
Okay. Look, finally from myself, then we have a chorus of doomers here in the north that will find the downside of everything without the balance of looking at positives, and I'm sure some of that chorus will sing to you shortly. But in terms of the positives, do you see any positives out of the protocol for business and for trade here in Northern Ireland? And you've met with many of the different sectors, many of the different groups and organisations who I'm sure aren't meeting you to talk about negatives. They're wanting to see opportunities. What opportunities do you see, and how are you as a government actively pursuing those positivities? And I mean, do you see room, for example, for a trade conference that we could do in partnership with the EU and the UK to be able to sell the position that Northern Ireland finds itself in, if that helps us to deliver new trade, new enterprise, new jobs?
So I think the positive thing about the protocol, and the reason we agreed it, was that it was it was intended and is clear on the face of it that it's intended to support the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. It was designed to provide stability after the Brexit, so that business understood in a durable way how things were going to work, and there is a set of trade-offs, and ensuring that there are there's no infrastructure and checks on the land border is extremely important. I was down in Newry this morning, and it's very obvious that that has been extremely important to the economic success in that area, and we think it's absolutely essential that is maintained, and it's good that we found a way do it. But it is a question of finding the right balance. There are aspects of the protocol that, as far as I can see, are not particularly challenged and are working well. And as I've said, there always will need to be a treaty framework. So, but we've got to get the core of it right. An investment conference, I mean, anything we can do to encourage further investment into Northern Ireland, of course, we're very happy to work with the Commission or anybody else on making that work. I think we will have plans of our own to encourage that as well, but the more the merrier, really.
Thank you for those. For myself, I'm going to open up to the committee now, and I'm going to go to the Deputy Chair of the committee, to John Stewart. So, John, over to yourself.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Hopefully I'm not one of the doomers that the Chair refers to. I'm sure he would never accuse me of being that, but you're very welcome today, Lord Frost. Thank you very much for coming along. I'll not rehash the Ulster Unionist Party's opposition to the protocol. It's on record. We intend to meet with yourself and the negotiating team again next week, and we look forward to articulating our concerns and putting forward our alternatives to you. Yesterday in the policy exchange meeting, and again today, you talked about a need for a rebalancing, and you're also talking about coming forward to bringing forward to Parliament potential mitigations. Can you set me out in detail what you see as the need and the areas that need to be rebalanced, and what those mitigations are going to look like coming forward to Parliament in the coming weeks?
Sure. So I'm afraid probably you'll have to wait till we make the statement to find out the full details. But obviously there aren't many days now till recess, so it won't be that far away. I think I don't want to sort of repeat myself too much, but I think the fundamental is finding a way to ensure that goods can move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland in a freer way than is possible at the moment. It's very clear there's a chilling effect at the moment because of the customs boundary, chilling effect on GB companies wanting to trade with Northern Ireland. That is clear both anecdotally and in the figures. We're also seeing increases in trade between Northern Ireland and Ireland in both directions, which suggests that supply chains are reordering and so on. And this has the political and economic consequences that we know about. So the economic relationship between Northern Ireland and Great Britain is obviously super important. It's essential. Northern Ireland is oriented towards Great Britain economically, and we need to find ways of operating that allow goods to flow in a way which reflects that reality. And I think that is the direction of travel, and those are the ideas that I think we'll be wanting to put on the table.
Arising from that, Lord Frost, you've said that the protocol is having not only a societal impact in Northern Ireland but an economic one, and with that could lead to the triggering of potentially of Article 16. Can you set out for me the threshold as you see it for triggering Article 16 and what would need to happen for that to take place?
So I don't think it's possible to give a sort of trigger threshold, and obviously Article 16 is quite an unusual provision. There are only a couple of other treaties that have it, and there isn't a great deal of kind of international jurisprudence on the subject that tells you when there is a problem or not. I think it's very sort of sui generis. I don't think I don't think it's possible for us to say X% of increase in trade in one direction is grounds for using Article 16 and Y% is not. I think you've got to look at the total situation, and what we are seeing is an increase in trade in both directions between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and the chilling effects I referred to earlier. So that trade diversion is there and happening. As we said, we keep all options on the table. We're not saying that a decision has been taken on this yet, but all options are very clearly on the table, and we need to look at come to I suppose I would say a responsible assessment of the situation and the right way to proceed in the interests of everybody in Northern Ireland.
Great. One final point, Chair, if I may. Final point, Lord Frost, and thank you for that answer, is on the supply of medicines. Can you give us an update on those negotiations? As you know, it takes 6 months. Any supplier must give 6 months' notice to quit supplying medicines into Northern Ireland. That's having an impact on the supply chain here and also on treatments. It is deeply alarming that that's happening. Could you give us a full update on that today?
So Rebecca might want to add to what I say here. So medicines obviously is the one area where we have had a proposal back from the Commission. It was, we got it about a month after they told the FT it was coming, but we're glad to have it anyway, and we're looking at it. There are a couple of aspects to the problem. You know, one is the ability to license drugs across the whole of the UK, and one is the ability to ensure that they can move effectively into a viable market in Northern Ireland. And we're studying this carefully. It's not quite clear that it solves the entirety of the problem, but it is quite complex. So we want to make sure we do that. There is some evidence that drug suppliers are beginning to withdraw drugs, or say they will withdraw drugs at the end of the year. And the longer the uncertainty persists, the more of that we'll see. But Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that?
Thanks, Lord Frost. As you say, we had a proposal in writing from the Commission relatively recently, and that was very welcome because I think we'd been having discussions with them on this for a good couple of months. I think we had a session, there was a sort of technical session with the Commission officials where we were able to sort of clarify a number of different aspects of the proposal. That's then enabling the experts to be able to establish whether it does or doesn't appear to solve the problems in what order, and whether or not any changes are needed to it. So happily those sort of detailed discussions can now happen, and are happening very rapidly, because I think this has been an issue which, since we sort of started this phase of technical discussions at the end of March, we have been stressing is of particular urgency. So we were unhappy to have to wait so long, but now that we have a technical proposal, we are working on it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I don't think I need to stress how important an issue that is. Obviously, everything in the protocol is massively, but the supply of medicines, undoubtedly. So thank you for urgency on that.
100%,
Thank you, Chair.
yeah, absolutely.
Martina.
And for me, all good. Thank you. You were Britain's chief negotiator for Brexit. Your eyes were wide open, and your fingerprints is on every page of the protocol. 63 pages of black and white. And you know that the people here in the north rejected Brexit, the majority of the people. And you also know that the majority of the parties here in this assembly, that represents the majority of the people out there, on nine separate debates here, that they rejected Brexit but support the protocol. So can I ask you, do you not accept that the protocol gives the North access to a single market, cost-free, and that the people here in the North who rejected Brexit want to see the All-Ireland economy, things that you referred to, the Good Friday Agreement, upheld in all of its parts? And it just seems to me that you're talking about now balance, when surely someone who had their fingerprints on every single page of the protocol, you were the chief negotiator, you were not asleep at the wheel. You knew that there was going to be trade adjustments. The dogs in the street knew that there were going to be trade adjustments. Even the DUP, who supported you throughout this Brexit, cheerleaders for Brexit, their reaction to what happened, they knew that there was going to be trade adjustments, and they felt you threw them under a bus.
So I think I would agree with some of what you've said. I wouldn't agree with all of it, which is probably what you'd expect. You're absolutely right. I was the chief negotiator both in 2019 and 2020, and we agreed the protocol as the best option in a very complex situation. We knew that it was, as I said at the start, unusual in its construct, notably by applying EU laws without any sort of normal democratic scrutiny, and that's why we had to put the consent mechanism in to ensure that was the case. So, as I said before, we knew that a lot had to be worked out. The protocol is a balance. Some of its provisions, explicitly require detailed sort of interpretation and negotiation afterwards, and how the boundary between GB and AI work depended on those negotiations. It's also a purposive document where, as I said, you have to read all of the provisions together. You can't take one in isolation, and it's not reasonable to interpret it as a document which simply requires an EU external border to be established. And the fact that is what's happening is causing many of the core problems at the moment. So I think it is, the fact that trade diversion was a risk, you're right to say that. That's exactly why Article 16 is there, and why trade diversion is highlighted as one of the possibilities which justifies the use of Article 16. So, the protocol, it's a delicate balance. It has to be read in total. It's very unusual and rests on sort of complex democratic foundations, and a lot of it remains to be worked out. And I think the core of the problem is that, for various reasons, it's not working out in the way that it should work if it's to achieve its purpose. And that's why we need to carry on the process of finding a balance so that it does achieve its purpose. I think that's the core of the issue here.
Well, you'll forgive me for believing that the reason why it isn't working out is because the British government, is not implementing the protocol in full. Now, for those of us who come from the north of Ireland, from the Republican nationalist community, we believe that the next agreement that you honour in full will be your first. So there's a lot of scepticism in relation to some of the things that you're saying, particularly as the Brexit chief negotiator. And I was an MEP in the European Parliament, and we witnessed and watched behaviour. You do, yeah, you remember that. You would. Can I ask you in relation to the High Court last week? It said that the protocol does not change the constitutional position in the North. Now, I would like to have the constitutional position changed, but that's for another topic for another day. You also told the Westminster Committee that the protocol, Article 1, does not change the constitutional position here in the North. And therefore, do you agree with the court in relation to the assessment? And do you also know that there was an opinion poll, there's been lots of opinion polls since Brexit and others here last week, taken or announced, and that opinion poll showed that only 6% of the people polled in the North, they have only 6% has trust in the British government, only 6% believe the British government, and therefore you need to realise that there's a degree of honesty and dishonesty. And I fear, or I have concerns, the Project Fear that was rolled out prior to the Brexit referendum, that there's some of that at play here. And I would ask you not to use this place in any agreement or exchange that you're having with the EU, because people here do not trust you, they do not believe you, and people here want to see the protocol implemented in full. Not everyone, but the majority of the parties here and the majority of the people here.
So I think on the first part of your question, on the court case, it has now been appealed. So I don't think it's right for me to go into the ins and outs of the arguments there, which will now have to be argued out in a different forum. I think what I can say is that it is clear on the face of the protocol that nothing in the protocol affects the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. It's clear about Northern Ireland's place in the customs union. It's clear about the place of Northern Ireland in the UK's internal market, and that's fundamental. It reflects the fundamental state sort of powers of the UK. So nothing in the protocol affects that. That's clear. I think I would distinguish that from what we perceive, though others will tell me, what we perceive as a high level of unease in significant parts of Northern Ireland, across broad unionism, but more, possibly more than that, about the way the protocol is working out, and that has consequences for broader senses of identity and the relationship between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. So I don't think that is necessarily a formal constitutional thing, but it's a real thing, and we pick it up in what's said, and that is what's at the core of the political problem that's behind the current situation, and that's what we've got to deal with. If we're looking at polling, and I've certainly seen the poll you say, and it's a salutary one, there's no doubt, in terms of how we take it forward. But the other, I've also seen polling which shows there is a 50-50 split, more or less, in public opinion about how, whether the protocol is a desirable thing or not. And if you have a 50-50 division of opinion on something as fundamental as that makes it very hard to operate. And that is the situation that we're in. The protocol depends on a broader level of consent if it's going to work. And at the moment that doesn't seem that obvious, and therefore we've got to find a way of ensuring that we can get that consent. And that political problem seems to us at the core of the difficulties that we're trying to solve.
I have many other questions I would like to ask, but I
understand. Okay, Trevor, we'll move to yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Both of you are very welcome. Good to see you here. I'm sorry to go back to dynamic alignment versus equivalence, but I think, Doris Frost, one of your quotes here, it said you aspire to the highest possible standards in SPS and veterinary matters. Has there been a problem between UK and EU in the past over those standards? Has there been an instance where perhaps we have wanted to aspire to a higher standard than EU?
Well, I mean, obviously, every EU SPS law has, we've had no choice about whether to implement it. We've been part of the debate that introduced the law, and sometimes we supported it, and sometimes we haven't. So I think we definitely aspire in the future to do different things in the broad agri-food area, I suppose. They're not necessarily always in SPS laws specifically, but for example on animal welfare, exports of animals. I think it's noticeable that the first change that came in after the end of the year in agri-food rules was one that we brought in that prohibited a particular plant product. I can't remember the name offhand, but so the first change was actually us bringing in a higher standard, albeit in a very limited area. The EU is already has already changed its agri-food rules once since the start of the year. There's another set of changes coming in August. It has been widely noted, although it's not agri-food as such, that they're planning to change food standards for animal feed. I think that's just natural. Some of these changes are going to happen, but we absolutely are going to maintain high standards and high scientific rigour in the way we take these things forward. That's just part of the game.
But I think you've said already, is the basic problem a matter of sovereignty rather than the standards?
So it is. The Brexit is a fundamental. It is about sovereignty to a large extent. It's about the right to set our own rules. And obviously the difficulty with the protocol is that there are two different sort of jurisdictions as regards SPS rules, and that's why that the very unusualness of that situation is why we have the consent mechanism and why you need broad consent. But it is not an unusual thing in the world to have control of your own agri-food rules. I mean, it's totally normal. It's not having control of them that's the abnormal thing, and that's why this current situation, which we took on as part of the protocol, has got to be managed in a sensible, proportionate, pragmatic way if it's going to be deliverable.
Yes, thanks. It's hard to escape the possibility that, standards can rise and standards can fall. Standards can be lowered for particular reasons. And when the UK does these trade deals around the world, I'm thinking particularly of the one that's agreed in principle with Australia, where animal welfare standards are actually lower than ours are. And you could say that probably the same about chlorinated chicken coming from the States, or even Brazilian beef. There's a lot of variation and a lot of opposition. Leaving aside the standards question, the competition comes into it as well. So I'm not going to make an accusation here, but if I was to suggest that Britain wants the option to lower standards as well as to heighten them, would that be a fair comment?
I don't think it would. We'd be very clear that in our manifesto in 2019 and ever since, that we intend to maintain high standards in this country, and we absolutely will. And animal welfare is kind of part of that. I don't think animal welfare standards are quite as low in Australia as you suggest, but obviously each country comes to its own views about that. But obviously, if you want to bring goods to this country, you've got to meet UK standards, and that's every country is the same. I think the reason why it matters and why it's a sovereignty question is it is connected to trade deals. It's not only connected to that, but it is connected to that. And it is very hard to ask third country to do a deal with us if our agri-food rules might change in future in a way that we can't foresee or control, in a way that might affect their trade. That's why it's important to have control, and that is why this is a problem as regards third country agreements.
Just one more quick one, Chair. You did say in your opening remarks that the UK had made major concessions to bring about the protocol agreement. Would you accept from me that the EU have made equivalent concessions, that they've pushed their boundaries considerably to accommodate the particular situation of Northern Ireland?
I think both sides have pushed the boundaries of what is normal in a relationship between two sort of jurisdictions to try and find a compromise in Northern Ireland that supports the peace process. Absolutely accept that. I think the problem is that what we thought was the right balance in 2019 has turned out that it isn't quite right because of events and because of reality since then. But absolutely, it is unusual for both sides. There's no doubt about that.
Can I just add something there, Lord Frost? I think, as Lord Frost highlighted earlier on, the protocol and the terms of the protocol are the prism through which the EU rules apply. And Lord Frost sort of cited a number of different bits there, and I think the protocol itself recognised that it is a unique solution for a unique situation. I think what's happening in practice is that sometimes in discussions with the EU in terms of what they expect to be happening in practice, it's as if the protocol itself, the prism through which these EU rules apply, wasn't there, and the rules just apply to goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the same way as if it was any EU external border. That's very much what it feels like and sounds like in the conversations, and I think the challenge is that those aspects of the protocol which are about reflecting the uniqueness of the solution and the uniqueness of the context in what happens in practice are forgotten. And I think what we've been trying to do in the conversations is to get the uniqueness back into the discussion, because I think that's the best way that we find that balance. And I think in the context of the question of equivalence as well, this is one area where we have been putting forward ideas and options for a conversation that would, yes, not align with any of the EU's existing precedents, because we don't feel that the uniqueness of the situation should be bound by precedents for vet agreements. There are ways of having a science-based approach to looking at the effect of rules, establishing whether there is any actual risk in practice, and acting on that basis.
Well, I hope we get there. Thanks very much for your answers.
Okay, we'll move next to Pat Sheehan. Pat?
Chair. And thanks for coming along, David, and Rebecca also. You took your time. You got here in the end, so well done. And first of all, there are a few myths going around about the protocol. I mean, one of them is that the population here is almost up in arms. And I suppose the subtext of your commentary thus far has been that there are major societal problems that need to be resolved. And there's also a suggestion that there's major disruption to the supply chains. And that's not the case. The shelves in the supermarkets are fully stacked, and supply chains are being reorientated. So there are opportunities there for local businesses here. And I suppose one of our issues with all of this is that given that the EU has resolved a number of issues recently around medicines, around guide dogs, the green card for insurance and so on, that this hasn't been acknowledged fully by the UK government, and that's an issue that might help resolve some of the tensions that do exist here. But would you agree with me that the fact that we here are going to have access to the UK government and the EU single market can only benefit the economy here?
So, I mean, it was certainly the intention when we agreed the protocol that, we should try and find that sort of balance, and that sort of access was important to the success of the agreement. I think the problem is that we don't have that balance, and the free flow of goods and what goes with it, is not the same from Great Britain to Northern Ireland as it is north-south from Northern Ireland to Ireland. And of course, it was never going to be exactly the same. But what we've got at the moment is a situation that's out of balance, it seems to us, where you're right in one sense that shelves are not empty here. That's obvious, but nevertheless, there is an adjustment of supply chains going on. There is trade diversion. I've spoken to companies here who can't get their usual supplies in from their usual suppliers in GB and have gone elsewhere, and that is persuasive that there is a problem that didn't exist before. Now, I don't think it's a problem that is impossible to resolve. I think it's a problem that is very possible to resolve with goodwill and to put the balance back together again. But it does have to be done. And the existence of this problem has to be taken seriously in a way that I don't feel it has been entirely in the discussions I've had with the EU so far, and Rebecca was suggesting that too in her comment. I don't think final comment. I don't think it's true to say that the EU has resolved problems like guide dogs or tagging of animals and so on, and their very welcome suggestion last week that they were going to put forward solutions. Unfortunately, we haven't had those solutions. We don't actually know what they are, so I can't tell whether they solve the problems or not. So I hope we'll get something soon. And if they do solve them, so much the better. But we do have to talk about them. It isn't enough just to come out at a press conference and say we've got a solution. and expect that that will end the discussion. That's the start of the discussion, not the end to it. In all those areas, we have put forward our own solutions. We've put forward papers, most of which actually we haven't had a reaction to. And we've got to have a better quality of discussion than that if we're going to resolve this problem. The political reality of this situation has got to be taken seriously in the discussions we have with the EU, and at the moment I don't feel that's happening entirely.
Thanks for that. And you've acknowledged that there isn't a constitutional issue, that there's, in your mind, there's a political problem. Now, I'm saying to you, it's being completely overblown, and that the vast majority of businesses and the farmers support the protocol. And on the issue of goods coming from across the water to here, I mean, if people can't get Cumberland sausages here, they'll certainly be able to get local sausages. And that's good for local businesses here. Would you not agree with me? And that was what was always going to happen in the context of this, that there was going to be a reorientation of supply lines. Businesses were going to find new markets and new opportunities. Thanks.
Well, I on the basis of the Northern Irish sausages I've had on my various visits here, I certainly agree with you. The local product is just as good, but obviously that's not really the point.
Someone would argue they're better.
The point is that the opportunities have changed, and the opportunities have disappeared for one producer, and yes, may have opened up for another, but that wasn't what we were trying to achieve here. I think business can speak for itself, and does speak for itself very, very vigorously. And I don't, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what business thinks, because you'll know as well or better as I do. All I can say is that I think business values the legal certainty of having an agreement between us and the EU, and they value, being able to proceed by consensus if we can, and I think that's absolutely reasonable and normal for business wherever I've met it. But I don't think I've met a representative of business community or a leader of a business who has said, this is absolutely fine, there is absolutely no problem with it, there are no difficulties of any kind. Some do very significantly downplay the difficulties, and obviously it does depend what your business is, but I would say almost without exception, people point to the difficulties in moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, the delays, the complexity with that. For some businesses that's extremely important. For some, obviously, it's only a small part of what they do. But it's unusual for that not to be mentioned as an aspect of the protocol that could be improved. And I do think that can't be dismissed when we're trying to find the way forward here.
I'm glad to say you're talking about the protocol being improved rather than done away with. Thank you. Thanks.
So, just on that final point, just to repeat, we've said there always will be the need for a treaty relationship between us and the EU covering Northern Ireland. I mean, I think that is self-evident, and we wouldn't seek to deny it. Obviously, it's the content that's the thing that he's talking about.
David, we got 46 minutes into an hour-long session before we mentioned sausages, so I think you're at least hopefully impressed by that. But well done, Pat, at getting that accolade for today's meeting. We're going to pass now to online. We have Diane Dodds who's joining us there, and we'll pass over to yourself, Diane, for some questions. We've about 12 minutes. No pressure there, but just we've 2 more as well. But we'll pass over to yourself.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Lord Frost, and I apologise that I was not able to be with you in person. I have some other duties today. Lord Frost, you mentioned at the start of your presentation that the protocol indicated that we had to have some significant compromises from the UK government, in that you agreed to apply EU law to part of the United Kingdom, and that you agreed to barriers within the internal market of the United Kingdom. Those are quite astonishing concessions in the first place. Do you now agree with the Prime Minister's sentiments in his evidence to MPs earlier this week that it was unfortunate and probably a mistake to give Brussels such leverage over the internal market of the United Kingdom and its trading arrangements through the protocol?
So I think what the PM was saying was he was alluding to the fact that a feature of the concessions that we made about the controlling goods and applying law is that the ultimate authority for the way that's applied is the EU institutions and the Court of Justice. And that is obviously even more unusual in some ways to allow continued jurisdiction of those institutions in part of the UK. It obviously is possible to control goods moving from one part of the UK to another without the European Court of Justice being the ultimate arbiter in that. That was what the EU insisted on at the time, but it doesn't have to be part of it if we'd done this differently. And I think part of the difficulty we've got with this is that, as the Prime Minister said, the rules are not in our hands. It is not possible to have a sort of normal debate amongst equals about the best way of satisfying the needs of both sides, because we're acting in this area under the legal authority of one party to the treaty, and that's quite unusual, and it obviously does affect the tone and balance of the discussions that we have, and I think that's probably what the Prime Minister was kind of alluding to when he made that comment.
So I take it from that, Lord Frost, that it actually was a mistake to allow such interference in the UK's internal market and the jurisdiction of a court outside of the United Kingdom within the UK's internal market. It's an astonishing position for a Conservative and Unionist government to get itself into. Can I go on to another element of this, which I think is massively important for Northern Ireland, and that is the issue of democratic accountability and consent. You obviously will be aware that you are in a Northern Ireland Assembly today where not one Unionist party or not one Unionist MLA within that Assembly supports the protocol. Now, the Chair may call us doomsters or whatever he wants to do, but respectfully and democratically, that is a shocking indictment of where we have now come. What are you going to do to restore democratic accountability in Northern Ireland? We will be governed by laws over which we have no democratic accountability. No MLA, no MP will have any say in the laws relating to agri-food, in the laws relating to goods, and so on. So what are you going to do to restore democratic accountability? And in relation to the issue of consent in Northern Ireland, as defined by the Belfast Agreement, means consent from both communities. You and the EU have overridden that in the protocol and now want majority rule. What are you going to do to restore the balance of consent?
So there's a lot in that question, and Chair, I don't mind running over a little bit if we need to make sure everyone gets a say and deal with the questions. Before answering your questions, can I just come back to this point about the court and the way that works? I think was it a mistake or not? I think there are just because you have the power to settle a dispute in a court doesn't mean you have to use it. I mean, there are two mechanisms for solving discussions in the protocol. There's an arbitration process and there's a court process, and they overlap to some extent. And I think just because you have the power to impose doesn't make imposing something the right thing to do. Sometimes it can be better to proceed by discussion and agreement. And I think, the fact that the EU immediately began a legal process in March for our very sort of low-level operational adjustments to one or two features the way the protocol works, doesn't help. I think there's the reason the court is there in our mind, at least at the time, is that we are operating EU law. In EU doctrine, the court is the ultimate arbiter of what that law means, and therefore, we kind of accept that's part of their doctrine. That doesn't make it sensible to bring every dispute ultimately to an infractions process and the European Court of Justice and behave with us when we raise problems in a way that sort of reflects that. I think there are other ways of doing these things that are consistent with that framework, and we're not quite seeing that. And if we could find ways of doing that, that would be, I think, a significant improvement. On your questions about democratic accountability, I have a good deal of sympathy with what you say. We knew this is democratically extremely difficult. Imposition of another party's law, even if it is in, as we saw it and see it, in the wider goal of protecting Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the peace process, the achievements that have been made so far. That is a very important wider goal that justifies things, but nevertheless, it is pretty unusual to have laws, set by an outside entity, and the consent mechanism is an albeit imperfect way of allowing the institutions here to say, looking at all these balances, it's working tolerably, or looking at all these balances, it's not working tolerably, and we have to find a solution. So that mechanism is I think fundamental to the workability of the arrangements. And if you don't have a sort of fairly broad consent at most points. This is not simply something about 4 years' time. You need to have broad consensus to make these arrangements workable between now and then as well. And that's why it worries us so much that we don't have it. So I don't have a good answer to your question, because I think it is extremely problematic, and it's only justified by the wider purpose of the protocol, and that's why it troubles us so much that it's operated in a way which seems to be undermining that purpose now.
Chair, can I just very, very quickly follow that up? I mean, I do think, Lord Frost, that if you uphold the Belfast Agreement, and indeed the Commission indicate this as well, then the idea that consent should not be drawn from both communities should be revisited as well, not just ongoing consent, as you talk about in your answer to me. There are just a couple of other things that I think really important, maybe we haven't highlighted today. This morning I listened to a representative from the Jewish community in Northern Ireland on the radio explaining how the rules on bringing in chilled meats to Northern Ireland will impact on their ability to get kosher product. Surely it's a fundamental right that we must protect the Jewish community, their ability to get the product that they need into Northern Ireland, and that this should be uppermost in the mind of the government as we go forward. And the other area that and we haven't strayed into this because it's relatively newly introduced to the House of Commons, but I think this is an area where we will have ongoing difficulties with the protocol for some time to come. Government has just introduced a subsidy control bill to the House of Commons, and that will control competition law and subsidies that can or cannot be made to firms and throughout the United Kingdom. But obviously, under Article 10 of the protocol, it will not apply to Northern Ireland in the area of goods, agri-food, etc. That means potentially that Northern Ireland firms will not have access to the same rules, whether they are relaxed or more stringent, in future that firms in the rest of GB. That will leave our companies here potentially uncompetitive. What will you do to resolve that issue?
So let me take the two questions in order. I mean, obviously, I hugely share your concern. We all do on the question of the Jewish community in Northern Ireland, and you know, none of the alternative ways of dealing with this problem seem remotely satisfactory. I mean, I like to think that, you know, the EU will in fact resolve this problem with us in a consensual way for very obvious reasons now that it's out there on the table as a problem. So I'll be very surprised, frankly, if we can't, because it's such an obvious thing where we need to find a pragmatic solution. But although it has been in the background for some time, it's only now emerged as an issue, and I'm sure we'll want to talk about that with the EU rapidly. On the subsidy control issue, I mean, this is an interesting and complex problem because obviously, as has been pointed out, one of the features of the protocol is that if you're a business trading goods in Northern Ireland, you have access to the whole of the single market, and that is sort of, presented as an advantage of the protocol. So I do kind of understand the logic in a way that says you have to look at that when you're taking state aid decisions. The fact that there's a wider entity involved here, whether we've got the right, whether the solution that's in the protocol is the right one remains to be tested. I think we did reach an agreement with the EU in December that the provisions of the protocol would only be applied to companies where there was a very clear connection with Northern Ireland and not a trivial one. The EU put out guidance in January which didn't seem consistent with that, and we've challenged that, but it's still out there. So I think it remains to be tested in practice, whether they're going to implement this in a sort of reasonable and pragmatic way or not. And it is, of course, another area where the court and the institutions stand ultimately behind decisions that are taken, and that's the problem. So it remains to be tested. We've now got a subsidy control bill, hopefully act soon, and we will have a good framework, and perhaps that will be reassuring to the EU when it's in place.
Okay, I'm going to pass over to Emma Sheeran now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to you both for joining us this afternoon. We know it's already been outlined by others today that Brexit was not supported by a majority of the people in the north of Ireland, and we know now that Brexit only arose because of what was effectively a civil war within the Tory party. And it led to a rising, it exposed, and in many parts was caused by a very nasty undercurrent of xenophobia and racism within elements of English nationalism. The same sort of ideology that gave us hostile environment, that gave us the terms of the EUSS, which concluded last week. And we've had the same sort of negativity from a minority in the north here since the onset of Brexit at the beginning of the year. We have had political unionism align themselves with masked men on the street, inciting violence, basically creating a situation from a trade agreement that was a threat to their identity and nationality, which is not the case as outlined by yourself. We're now in the weekend of the 12th. Will you take this opportunity to condemn in totality any threat of violence or incitement of violence on the streets in the north?
So obviously I don't quite agree with your characterisation of Brexit and how we got here and so on, but that's sort of water under the bridge now. Obviously, we don't want violence. Obviously, we condemn violence. We condemn incitement to violence. That is wrong. We think there should be calm and that these problems should be resolved politically. But what we are seeing on the streets in Northern Ireland in terms of the protests and so on is seems to me to be a manifestation of quite a lot of popular discontent about the protocol, and peaceful protest is a perfectly legitimate right in this country, and where people don't support things, they protest about it. But obviously nobody wants violence, nobody encourages that, and absolutely we don't want to go back there in that direction in any way.
Chair, if I can just for clarification then, so you refer to peaceful protests. We've had mass men on the streets, we've had threats of violence, we have situations now across parts of Belfast where we have vulnerable residents and elderly people asking for chickenware in front of their houses because of bonfires that they're scared are going to damage their homes. Will you condemn those who are standing with loyalists on the street talking about violence over a protocol which you have already acknowledged does not change the constitutional position, much as I would wish that it would, of the North of Ireland within the UK?
So, as I understand it, it's illegal to commit acts of violence, and it's illegal to encourage others to do so. So, obviously, I condemn that. That is obvious.
It wasn't to me. Thank you very much.
Okay. Christopher.
Thank you, and thank you for your evidence thus far. I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, that some may choose to wish that those of us who are opposed to the protocol didn't exist, but we do exist, and we're one of the major political traditions in this place, and we deserve to be treated with respect, not dismissed as doomsters or gloomsters. I am articulating the legitimately held concerns of my constituents. How can you tell me that there has been no constitutional change in the status of Northern Ireland when laws made by foreign powers and implemented and overseen by foreign courts will apply here, but they will not apply in the rest of the country of which I am a citizen? You describe that situation as pretty unusual. It's not pretty unusual, it's a constitutional outrage.
So I don't think I've got much to add to what I said earlier, and I wouldn't want anything I say to be interpreted as a comment on the ongoing legal proceedings, because I do think it would be wrong to prejudge those. I think all I can do is repeat that nothing in the protocol. The protocol is clear that it does not affect Northern Ireland's position as part of the UK, or as part of the Customs Territory, or as part of the internal market. That's on the face of the protocol, and that is that's the reality of the situation. But as I say, there is a court case going on this subject, and I don't think this is the right place to debate the legal arguments that are going to be surfaced there in a very high forum, no doubt, relatively soon.
Can I quote to you the noble Lord Barwell, who said recently, "It's tempting to believe that despite all of the warnings, the government underestimated the effect of the protocol, but I'm pretty sure that this is not true. They knew it was a bad idea, but agreed to it to get Brexit done, intending to wriggle out of it later on. Michael Gove negotiated a dog's breakfast of a deal, and you've been left to clean up the mess, haven't you?"
So I saw those comments by Lord Barwell. I obviously we intend to implement what we sign up to, and it's the fact of implementation that is causing the problem. I would say that it was the inheritance that we inherited from the previous government and the previous negotiating team that has been a significant part of the difficulty, and the reason that the protocol is shaped as it is because we had a particular inheritance from the previous team who could not get their deal rightly, in my view, through Parliament, and unfortunately we were not able to go back to scratch and do things in a different way. And I think the previous team are to a very large degree responsible for some of the infelicities in this protocol and the withdrawal agreement that we might be better without, but unfortunately we are where we are.
Why would applying systems designed for international trade to a highly integrated domestic market have not produced anything other than difficulties?
Oh, well, that's exactly the problem, and that's why the balancing provisions in the protocol, were so important, and why we put so much reliance on them when we agreed them. It isn't an international border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I mean, the protocol is absolutely clear about that. It's a means of controlling goods for wider purposes. And if you treat it as if it were an international border with a normal implementation of the EU Customs Code, there'll obviously be a problem. Goods don't move into Northern Ireland in containers on big ships. They come, in small quantities, sort of packaged up in small ways in the back of HGVs, and you have to have systems that are capable of dealing with that. And most international trade isn't quite like that.
You accept for a country of our size and a border of that nature, there's a disproportionate, completely over the top amount of checks presently taking place.
So, I mean, 20% of all the processes in the EU are taking place between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and obviously that makes no sense. And the reason that's the situation is because we're trying to apply rules designed for one situation to another situation, and it makes no sense. We have to find a better way of doing that in everybody's interest.
Do you think the brutal implementation of border checks that you've mentioned, the totally disproportionate implementation of border checks, is aimed at strong-arming the United Kingdom government into an SPS agreement?
I mean, I think the basic answer is no. I'm no doubt that there are some within EU structures who still see things like that and have not moved on from the referendum. I think more that what we're seeing is that the EU, it comes to decisions with, laboriously and with great pain. It incorporates them in law, and it's then very reluctant to sort of move from them or reinvent them in ways that are tailored. And I think to be honest, I think we're more seeing those instincts than we are anything else, but obviously there's probably a range of opinion on this question if you ask EU officials.
One final point. I, like you, absolutely condemn violence or the threat of violence, and unlike other parties, I've always done it. Can I ask you, when the DUP outlined our concerns about Theresa May's sea border, we were ignored. We outlined our concerns now about Michael Gove's sea border. Can I ask, why should the unionist community believe that you're listening to them now?
Well, I think our actions are showing that we are, listening to the concerns that, as far as we can tell, clearly exist about the way that this is working. I repeat, violence is wrong, and we condemn it, and encouraging violence is wrong, and we condemn it. But the problem that we face at the moment is on the protocol is a political one, and an economic one, and a practical one, and those problems should be resolved in that way, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, David and Rebecca, thank you very much. That concludes the questions. I think given the depth of the issue and the various range of views that there is just in this room, we could probably talk all evening. I know we're often accused of not getting into enough depth in our questions, but sometimes in 2 or 3 questions you don't get an opportunity to be able to drill down into the level of detail that we would like to. And I hope maybe on the back of that you might take up if we could offer to meet with you maybe later in the year again, virtual if needs be, and if you're visiting again and it works, that would be useful just to continue with that. You've clarified a number of issues today which I hope can be amplified out into the community, that we maintain the cool heads all round, especially at this time of year, to make sure that we don't see violence on our street, but that we see within the negotiations some settlement and some practical outcomes that works for everyone. But thank you very much for your attendance today, and we wish you all the best with your work.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Would you mind if I made a very short contribution? It's not even a question. In relation to the pensions that are believed to exist here, and the population being exercised about the protocol. There was a protest called several weeks ago against the Irish sea border, and there were more press photographers turned up to that protest than protesters. So that's an indication just how much overblown this issue about tension within the community and so on is. So I hope you leave you with some facts about that.
I actually thought you were going to get an invite to the West Belfast constituency there for a tour, but it was a comment.
Thank you. Noted. I think. And,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Of course, I'm very happy to try and find time later on.
And Sarah Ann will lead you back. I know you are heading back to the airport, but thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank
you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I know. You didn't. So I probably could bounce back to that bit of it. Many papers here today. I did just omit to note George Robinson's apology at the start. He did say that he would like to be here, but unfortunately he's not able to be here today. So we note that. There are a few items. We're taking the opportunity to run through a few items of correspondence while we're all here before we all rush off on a Friday afternoon. First of all, can I just ask members maybe to note the draft minutes? Item 3, they're on page 123 of the meeting pack. Are members happy of that being a minute of the meeting on the 30th of June?
Yep.
Okay. Item 4 is correspondence. There are 13 items of correspondence on pages 133 to 243 in the meeting pack. On item 4.9, which is at page 201, there's correspondence from the Commission for Victims and Survivors asking to brief the committee on its work. Given that there is no commissioner in place at the moment, we maybe think that, just as a suggestion, it would be good to have the Victims and Survivors Service maybe to come up and brief us. Would members be agreeable with that?
Yes.
Okay, that can be organised then. That's us then. From oh yes, there's agreement. There is a press release on which is on page 241 of the pack for today's meeting. Would members be happy with that?
Go for it.
Sure, everybody got to that one in the pack, as it can be said.
Every word.
Item 6 is the forward work programme, which is on page 246 of the meeting pack. Are members happy to note that?
Yep.
Okay, any other business?
Yep.
Members, can I wish you all well? I think recess starts in about an hour and a half's time for people. I know everybody will be very busy back in their constituencies over the summer period, but can I wish everybody well? I hope that everybody does get a break and get some rest and relaxation and time with families, and look forward to seeing everybody refreshed and back and keen in September time. So all the best, and we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you.
Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.